So this week's topic, we've kind of, circled around a lot in the last couple of episodes with some of our guests, and I talked about it briefly last week, hopefully to prepare people for it. Maybe cool. If they wanted to check out some of like the recommended resources on this topic of introversion, because we've sort of, talked about how we both self-identify as introverts, and I've got a hair in my eye or something right now. It's killing me.
Take that moment to cough then.
Yeah, and kind of, it was interesting because you brought up like this idea of how is it that somebody who's introverted can create a podcast or do video. And I think we've got helpful tips to share, and kind of like, our stories plus some of the stuff that I've been reading that kind of puts together this toolkit. Because I think what it comes down to is whether you are introverted or extroverted. Perhaps if you're an introvert, it may be a little bit harder to find your flow because you are so like stuck in kind of what's comfortable or what's your kind of normal day to day, that you don't get out of your quote unquote shell enough to explore the different avenues. And but then the interesting flip side of that, which I guess we'll kind of get into today as well, is I've heard from some of these like researchers that kind of, specialize in this like study of introversion and extroversion, that perhaps people who are introverts can get into a deep work or flow state easier.
So maybe that's the catch-22, right? Is like hard to get there in the first place, but once we get there, I'm saying we because that's us. Once our people get there, it's a lot more fluid.
Yeah.
Which we'll talk about that because I know you've got some good tidbits backing it up.
For sure.
But,
so let's start, I guess. We'll dive into the research afterwards, but like I think the interesting kind of hook to this all, you told a pretty good story about like your path into personal training, in particular with somebody who you were listening to that kind of could have very potentially like derailed that journey. So what happened there? And
hi, I'm Telsi and I'm an introvert, like by the book, and maybe it doesn't seem like that because I'm bubbly and whatever, but it takes me some solo recharge time to get there. And anyway, so when I was kind of toying with the idea of being a personal trainer, I was afraid of it. And I've talked about that before, like when you're ready to go into something exciting, it seems bigger than you and you get imposter syndrome, and then it's scary, and then maybe you don't want to do it. So what I do when I'm nervous about something is extensive research on every angle because I like to feel prepared when I'm walking into something. And so I was thinking about being a personal trainer, and like it's been a lifelong dream of mine, at least since I was about 11. And so when I was ready to start pursuing it, I watched this video on YouTube, what to expect or something like that as a personal trainer. Like, essentially it was just this girl talking about how here's all the hard and fast rules about personal training, and if you can't fulfill these, then you can't be a trainer. And her language was really harsh. And as a recovering shy person, at the time I was quite shy, and so that was really intimidating to me. But she was saying, like, you have to be a morning person. You have to be okay with getting up at 6 a.m. and training people, and you have to be bubbly first thing in the morning. And like already that's a red flag for me. And then she's like, and you have to be an extrovert. You have to be. Right. To be a personal trainer, because you're reaching out to people, you are leading, you are working one-on-one with people, and apparently that equates to extroversion. And that stopped me in my tracks, because I was like, whoa, I don't feel these shoes. And it was a mental battle, because I had this desire that has been going on for however many years to do this, and then this one girl was like, no, you don't fit the bill. And I listened to it for about a month. I just kind of put it off and was like, nope, okay, no, that makes sense. That's too big for me. That's, I'm not the right person for that. I'm more of a behind the scenes girl. And thank God my desire was stronger than that, because I still just had this gut impulse that it was for me. And maybe now I'm kind of, not now, but at the time I was in a place of like, I'm going to prove this girl wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm doing all right in it. It's been like 6 years in this profession, and I'm here to say that, as an introvert who's not bubbly first thing in the morning, like, I'm crushing it. And I'm proud of myself for that. So that was my first real, like, understanding that the world really believes, or at least at the time, I think we're changing now, but the world really believes that extroversion and entrepreneurship go together. Go hand in hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things that really stick out with that is, for one, like I definitely can relate to the whole, you kind of talked about like diving into the research of everything before making a decision. So I think that's something I'll come back around to, but also like this recovering shyness thing. Yeah. So that's so the interesting thing, or I guess part of like the central theme of this topic is that so introversion and shyness are different things.
Big time.
And perhaps, I guess we're trying to bring to light this to an audience that perhaps hasn't heard of some of this stuff. It seems like it might be old news to some people, because a lot of like the trending of promoting introverts in what's called like the quote unquote extrovert ideal world sort of revolved around the one lady's name. Her last name is Canweiler.
Okay.
And I think it might be Jennifer or something. I just finished her book. It's funny, I can't remember her name, but the book's called The Introverted Leader.
Cool.
And then Susan Cain is kind of I guess we can say sort of like the spearhead of she's got a very popular TED Talk on introversion, and she wrote the book Quiet. And those were a couple of the things that I researched going into this conversation, just because I happened to be reading some of it, and it was interesting because we'd been talking to some extroverts that I was kind of just, it was mulling around the idea in my mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, shyness and introversion are not the same thing. So kind of this whole idea of introversion or extroversion, the test that most people kind of suggest is, where do you go to recharge your batteries? Is it with other people? So whether it's like in a social environment, or do you need to like get into that solitude, that quiet space alone? And we're all on there's never like a pure introvert or pure extrovert. We're all on like a spectrum of it all. So everybody to some extent can say one or the other. And an interesting kind of like further step to this tool to figure out is, if you're in like a close group, or if you're in a a gathering with people that you're really close to, how do you feel after 3 or 4 hours together? Is that like, do you find, even though you're really like intimate with them and everything, do you still have to go off and recharge your batteries alone? Or does that do it? Is that sufficient? And that's kind of how you can, I guess, figure out if you're more leaning towards the introvert or extrovert scale of it all. And shyness does start, but it's a little more prevalent in introverts, especially in the earlier years, because what happens is we actually, I think like a lot of us start out without like the cues of being introverted, because children have tons of energy, they just burn it out all the time. And I can even recall from like, I think it was grade 1, or it was very young age, like the talent shows or whatever, and being like the loudest kid singing on stage the song. And then it just like, it seems to be like the early teenage years where things start to shift gears for a lot of introverts. you tend to start to be called like shy. And I think that's also a bit of a label that's put on kids because they, prefer to do their work alone rather than in group settings, maybe have closer but less friends rather than being like the popular or cool kid. And like shyness is more of a label than like a personality trait in some ways. But there is definitely like shyness is more revolved around a fear of other people's opinions or social interaction, of like a social anxiety is really more what shyness is versus introversion.
Totally.
And so I don't know, like I guess the main point that I want to make with this whole shyness thing is it goes away. It just takes a bit of hard work. And I think like this book, The Introverted Leader, that I was reading kind of goes through like one of the main steps to becoming a better leader if you're an introvert is you do have to push yourself. And I think we talk about that a lot. It's even like it's central to the idea of flow states, right? You've got to push yourself into that boundary of just about uncomfortable but still within your skill level in order to actually like upgrade your skill and master something and grow. Totally. So that's where you get people that are introverts that are able to be on video or do podcasts.
Hi.
It's all about, you got to push yourself a little bit further than you're comfortable, and it'll get easier over time. And we can probably like dive into a few more tips with that.
Yeah, I was just going to say with the shy point, like I think what I've realized, because I was, we'll say, quote unquote, like cripplingly shy when I was a young child. Like I was the girl hiding behind my mom's legs being like, I don't want to go in there. However, at the same time, I was the girl being like, I want to sit at the adult table instead because I found it intellectually stimulating. I was a precocious young one. But for me, I find the more that I get to know myself and my needs, shyness was just like almost like a radar or like feedback that I'm not giving myself that recharge time, because then I have that fear of, social interactions or being in public or something like that. And then I feel like I need to retreat. Yeah. Part of it, that fear, I shouldn't be using that as a vehicle, but it is telling me like, hey, I haven't recharged. At least in my adult life, like when I'm feeling a little bit shy, it's like, okay, you need to go home. You need to do some things for yourself, like fill your batteries up, and then go out and try again. Yeah, it's like you're just pushing to the point of that emotional burnout too much. And then it represents as shyness or fear of being in public or anxiety or whatever. Yeah, just because like whether you push yourself over the limit for like that time frame, or you just kind of learn that it's so draining that it feels uncomfortable, right? And because you haven't figured out the strategies. So that's an excellent point, and that's something that these books talk about. And I like the term for it, is they call it the restorative niche. And so that's something that like I've kind of found on my own too, but I really like this term for it. Just kind of like jump back into like the story, my own story, and kind of where I've sort of, I'd say, come out of or like developed the ability to do more things and push myself. Definitely like going off to university on my own was kind of like the first stepping stone, because then it's like, complete independence. And if you don't do it on your own, then you don't do it at all kind of thing. And that helped a lot. And then finding sort of the right mix of friends along the way that weren't, super draining, that preferred things to be a little bit more laid back and things like that helped. And then going into like the career path,
once again, there's been like a decade of reading things that interest me, especially before taking the leap into owning my own business. But kind of finding that whole topic of, well, really the first kind of few books that I read that were no longer just the fantasy novels that I love to escape into, that were nonfiction, were things like the Walter Isaacson biography of Steve Jobs.
Oh, yeah.
Which, like, I didn't know nonfiction could be so interesting. And then I kind of found Tim Ferriss, and he inspired me a lot for a while because he's definitely a little more quiet and reserved, introverted, and yet leading this really neat life. And he was sort of this boundary between like entrepreneurship and wellness or health and stuff, where he kind of intersected things. And so some of that stuff like led me into really enjoying reading like business books and the stuff that I read a lot of still, but that started to like switch the gears in my mind to thinking it was like an actual possibility. And then, but along the way, it was also being kind of thrown, into this job that was extremely extroverted required, I would say, as like a supervisor and then manager for the food services at Queens, leading teams of 50 and more staff.
Wow.
And it was extremely draining. And I, like, looking back on it, like, I can see there was no escape. So there was no restorative niche in those jobs, which made it. There was still a lot of things I enjoyed, like the one-on-one interactions with staff members and customers and things like that. But it was also like it threw me way out of my comfort zone, and so I got used to it a little bit more too that way. Just kind of realizing that. So one of the concepts in these books, like Quiet, is if it's for a core personal project, you can escape from your usual tendencies, and they call it situationism or the free trait theory. And it's this idea that you can present yourself as an extrovert. Knowing yourself really well definitely helps in that capacity, because that's where like these restorative niches come in. So the story that I really like that really kind of sells this all is there's this professor who seems like the most grandiose extrovert ever, and he gets on stage, he's very dramatic and entertaining, and gets standing ovations for his lectures. But then the moment he steps off stage, he runs to the closest bathroom and hides, because he needs that. He knows himself well enough that that's where like he needs to recharge his batteries that way. Yep. Like he can't be just schmoozing with the students or whatever afterwards, or if it's at like a lecture where whoever is trying to get his attention, like he can't keep doing it, because that's where you reach that point of like burnout kind of thing. Burnout is kind of, I think in the terms of introverts, it's more like it's more just like your batteries are drained to the point that you just don't have the same persona or ability.
You're vibing low in those, like it's. Yeah.
But it's not like the true like stress burnout. It gets to that point over a chronic period.
Yeah, it's more you're just drained. Like you can't. People will say, "You don't seem like yourself today." Yeah. You're like, "I'm not."
So yeah, that was all kind of led together and came to this point. But
I relate to that story a lot, actually. With the professor, I didn't even realize I do this until now. I spent kind of the week analyzing myself, and in between every client, I escape because I can't. Like, people try to come up and talk to me, and that really stresses me out, because I have to get in my zone for clients, and my job is to be fully present for another person. Yeah. And in order to do that, I need to make sure that I'm not distracted and recharged in my own self. So I hide in the change room.
Oh, yeah.
Or I like, even if I don't have to, I go to the bathroom between every client because I need a minute. And some people, like, I know people have struggled with that, and employers of mine have struggled with that, just to understand, you know, why aren't you dancing around the gym and saying hi to members between clients?
Oh, yeah.
It's just straight up because then my clients don't get the same service. And if I'm going to serve these people with all of my heart, which is one of my values, I have to do that, then I need that minute.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because then, you know, something that I know you've been talking about a lot lately is when you don't give yourself those chances enough, it reaches this point of true, like, adrenal fatigue.
Oh, yeah.
Which,
tell me about
you know,
that.
You've been talking about a lot lately and spreading the word of.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think this is probably like the critical piece. Even if you identify as shy and you don't yet know if you're more introverted or extroverted, knowing that there's like this escape or figuring out where you can escape to in between whatever it is, or for those brief moments, it can be really valuable.
It's huge. Like, it makes or breaks the way that I interact with people.
Yeah.
If you're ever noticing me being a little bit, I don't get distracted, but I get kind of sharp. That is when I'm not recharged enough. That's when someone, like, this is what I do, is someone's taken up my time, the time that I have dedicated towards myself. And it's really hard socially with stuff like this, like, not just with my career, but it's hard for people to understand that you just need a minute. Like, sometimes in groups, if we go away on like vacations or whatever with groups, you will always find me being like, okay guys, I'm gonna take an hour and like go hike, and then everyone goes, what's wrong? What's wrong? Like, nothing's wrong, and I'm not upset with you. I just need a minute so that I can be with you. You know?
And that's super cool. I think it was in the Introverted Leader book. They suggest actually that you even introduce yourself as whether you're shy or whether you're introverted. You actually like
let it be known.
They use this example of, I think it might have been like the CEO of Campbell's Soup at one point, and he identified as being very shy. And he would actually, like, whether it was a new employee, you know, he's a top level leader, and it's like, hi, I'm Bill, or whatever. It doesn't matter.
Mr. Campbell's.
Yeah. And I'm, it's like, I'm introverted, or I tend to get quiet. And if you kind of present that to people, I've never tried that strategy so much. But it's interesting. It could work. It might be something worth trying.
Interesting.
Depending
I've tried
on what
with
situation you're
my
in.
personal values, and besides, I guess, alone time, because I don't know how people fit into that. That's really interesting. But I've tried it with, like, communication's a really big one for me. So with clients, I always say before we even start training together, if they're new to me, I need you to communicate with me. If you don't like a thing that we do together, if you don't like me, if you don't like the time we're training at, like, I don't care what it is, like, tell me about it so we can make this more comfortable for you.
Yeah.
And then, sigh of relief. All of a sudden, that guard is off. So I do wonder if I were to do that, say, like, if I'm not looking at you and smiling, it's because I'm in my own zone for a minute.
Yeah.
Because I'm having my introvert time.
Yeah. I mean, even just spreading this awareness further to new populations also helps for sure. So we had some good questions that kind of go along with this all. So we talked about, like, the introversion versus shyness in our own journeys. And so actually the idea of, like, tips for getting out of your shell. So I don't know if I like the whole concept of, like, the shell.
Yeah, it makes us seem weak, huh? Like,
well, like,
for some reason
humans don't really have a shell.
Well,
so
also that.
It's like, I don't know.
Yeah, where did that come from?
I don't know.
Turtles.
Turtles
must be introverts. I don't know. Only one person fits in their home, so maybe that's what it is.
Yeah.
Interesting. Tips for getting out of your shell. I think just my tip in every podcast is know yourself better. Like, this still stands.
Yep.
Because there is a fine line, like, between fear and letting that limit your experience in life, and truly knowing when you need to not participate in something due to recharging. And so if you can distinguish that, if your reason for not wanting to do something that involves other humans or not wanting to do something that seems big is simply because it's scary, that to me is not good enough. That to me is not an introvert. That's just an afraid person. But if your actual need is like, I'm exhausted and I don't think I have anything that I can contribute to that, no good. Like that's when stay in your shell, quote unquote, like stay home, recharge, or go to nature, like whatever you do to recharge, because you need to be full to give. So I think, first tip is like analyze yourself, and we'll use the gas tank as a weird metaphor, but like analyze how full that is. And if you have nothing to give, you're not a bad person for that. Like I'd argue you're doing yourself a disservice and you're being a bad person to yourself if you still go. Yeah. You know, you still do that thing. So that's my first tip. Okay. What do you got? If you're always just going, and you're from a place of empty, you are like, that's all that's going to result from that is burnout. And that's really disrespectful to yourself and like honestly disrespectful to others. Yeah. If you're a people pleaser, and need to do that. Yeah. And, well, going back into like the rules or this guideline that these books like The Introverted Leader suggest, pushing yourself is valuable, like to an extent. So whether there's different ways, you know, you can have like an accountability buddy to help support you and help push yourself, or a mentor or a guide or something or something you're committed to. Once again, going back to this idea, if it's part of like your core personal project or one of them, something that you really identify with, that's going to make a big difference. So if you have to, you know, meditate on that idea to figure out what those things truly are, what you really value, it's probably going to make it that much easier to then get out of your quote unquote shell. And also maybe like, you know, we talk about how like the power of words and what you say like represents your reality. Don't necessarily like erase that from your vocabulary, that idea of being in a shell. That can make a big difference too. If you no longer see it as that, then that no longer is your reality. So I think that's something to consider. You know, you can write it down daily, like in whatever way it resonates with you. Brain, You can look at yourself in the mirror and say it, which I think works less well for introverts. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of the whole like looking myself intensely in the mirror and trying to say something. It feels weird. Makes you feel a bit goofy, and that's okay. Don't do it if it doesn't work.
Yeah, but and
I think I would also say, like, just kind of on that note, stop believing that you have to show up a certain way. Because if your idea is that, like, I need to recharge so that I can appear as if I'm this bubbly, extroverted wackadoo that I'm actually not, that's exhausting. Because then you're putting on a costume every time you go out in public and you're creating this vision of yourself that's untrue. So why don't you just show up as maybe a quiet intellectual and use that as your power instead? Stop believing that you have to be that, you know, whatever the vision of an extrovert.
That's a great point. And that's another thing that's strongly suggested. Like, people will know if you are faking it. You know, you can kind of, once again, this like free trait theory or whatever it was called, you can kind of shift things a little bit, but you can't shift it to a huge extreme. It's noticeable when it's not you. And actually, like, this ties into I think this ties in really well to the question, like kind of the next question of how you can do a podcast or video as an introvert, whether it's a YouTube channel or Instagram stories. And it is all about being yourself. Yeah. And if you're like the quiet intellectual type, that's what you want to present, because there's an unlimited number of people willing to listen to you if you're wanting to share it, if it's something that is deeply like valuable to you. And that's I think an important key to it, as we've said several times now as well, when it comes to making video or podcasts or anything like that. Sharing your stuff is important because you've got something valuable to share.
Yep.
But and it's okay if it's not at the frequency that you see, you know, certain people, if they're, I was thinking about it as like, extroverts may just want to, you know, they like the small talk, right? And introverts tend to lean towards,
at least apparently.
And well, actually, like
is it part of the study?
It is part of something that's been studied. So it's it is a little more tried and true than just like an idea. It seems to have some merit, and introverts are more like the ones that like the deep conversation, not the small talk. Being kind of, whether it's a thought leader or just having something like deeper to share, kind of connect with, and so when it comes to podcasts or video, you might see like the frequency of somebody that's extroverted. You know, they want to talk, they want to do the vlog and talk about their day and stuff. Like they want to make that small talk and make it entertaining. And you don't necessarily have to do that to succeed.
Sure,
so you don't have to like follow any sort of perceived routine with social media stuff either.
No, I think we all know deep down that like authenticity goes a long way.
Yeah.
And if your authentic self, I really hate the word true self that everyone's using these days, like, but anyway, that's a different tangent. But if your authentic self is quiet, then just like own that. There's value to that. And another thing that I've really instilled in myself and learned in the past couple of years is that confidence can be quiet too. Yeah. And that's something I've been really learning and kind of harnessing, is that like quiet confidence is still confidence. I can still be totally content in my being and not have to prove it to you with words. Yeah. It goes differently in a podcast, obviously, but I don't have to. I think that goes into that getting out of your shell thing, like, or whatever that facade is that when you're when you're not being an introvert at home, that's your shell. You don't have to be loud, right, to be seen and to be heard and to be understood and to feel value. You can be quiet and you can stand your ground, and you know that's really grounding for people. I don't know if you've gotten this, but I get this a lot, especially from extroverts, is that you're just so grounding. Like I come to you for calm and I'm like, what? But it's just, I don't know, I guess I talk a lot, but I'm quieter in my grounding and in my confidence, and
oh, sorry, there's a doggy up there.
I saw that in the reflection and also got distracted. Introverts love dogs. I think I'm just rambling now, but I think that's a really important point, is to realize that confidence can be quiet and it's still confidence and people feel it. Yeah. And I think that's like,
it's knowing yourself, and confidence just builds over time. Like you got to build competence. So it's getting good at things helps with your confidence. Maybe pushing yourself a little to like toot your own horn a bit. That's one of like the suggestions with this is like, especially because you know the Introverted Leader book is about being able to stand out, as with, I think like the subtitle is something about like your quiet confidence or something. Cool. It's interesting they actually use that in their subtitle. And then the other thing with this is like that connection between introverts and extroverts as far as energy balance goes. And this is another question. So how do you deal with like that excess of energy with extroverts? Do you find it draining? And like, how do you cope with that? I think that's what
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really solid question. Small doses.
Yeah.
Usually. And that's that self-awareness piece, just knowing my limits and not going past them and believing. I think for me, I'm definitely a recovering shy person and recovering people pleaser, but knowing that like I'm not going to offend that person if I have to leave after an hour or something like that. I've spent that quality time. We can cherish that. And when I say like, hey, I'm tired, I need to go, it's not going to ruin that other person's day. It's not going to ruin their extroverted energy. I'm not going to suck them dry. They're going to go off and bounce somewhere else.
Yeah.
That's what I do is, know my limits, and then I set boundaries. And I have the really wonderful social excuse of like, hey, I have to go let my dog out to pee, and no one gets mad about that. So introverts, get a dog. Really helps you run away from social occasions if you need to.
And gives you the chance for small doses of interactions with other dog owners too.
True. Yeah, small doses. I mean, I'm in a relationship with an extroverted human, and I haven't even thought about how I balance it. I think there's just a lot of respect for our needs. Like, we're hilarious together. Like, it'll be like a full moon on Friday the 13th this past year or whatever, and typically the full moon makes all the crazy people vibrate a little crazier. And we were talking about it together, and I said, oh man, I'm staying inside that night. And he was like, I gotta get out and see all the hooligans. like that's just, and so instead of just trying to like be a unit in those moments, it's like, okay, you go there, I'll go here, see you when we meet again. So just respect knowing your extroverted people, knowing your introverted people, letting them do their thing. Yeah,
it's interesting. And I think like this also, this comes into play a lot in school and in business. So that's where those worlds are this, what we call like the extrovert ideal. And there's, I don't know if they're shifting. There's different ways to find like the industries or schools that maybe work a bit better for you. Perhaps like, when we were talking to Laura about U of T versus Trent with smaller classes, that's kind of an example of it, right? Maybe take that into account when picking out your university, whenever possible, or picking out like your career place, right? And you're entitled to ask questions in the interview as much as they're asking questions, and those are things you can kind of try to figure out for yourself. Put yourself in a place that's good for you, not that's going to hold you back, and not that's like too safe because you want to have growth, but know yourself and like respect yourself enough to put yourself where you fit. And I think like over time, as you build confidence that you have something valuable to say, if it's in, say, a business meeting or whatever kind of businessy setting like that, as you build confidence that you have something valuable to say, you'll say it. You'll start to say it. You'll have to, even if you write things down, instead of trying to keep it in your head, have something written down beforehand so that you actually want to get that out. And there's different rules you can kind of go by, like the first 5 minutes. So you got to say something within the first 5 minutes, so that you're involved in the conversation and not just in the background. Or if somebody that's super extroverted, is taking up a lot of time, and you are the leader of that conversation, whether you're the boss or you're just like a higher rank or whatever, and you're running the conversation or the meeting, you may have to, cut them off, and once again, they're not going to get offended that you've as long show respect that you understand their point's been made, but they don't need to continue rambling on. Things like that, I think, helps to keep that extroverted energy in balance with kind of like the quieter, sort of reserved, grounded approach of it all.
There's something with that, like if I have something that I really, really, really believe in, and I'm in a meeting or a setting and I don't say it, I go home upset. I regret it. And so I reverse engineered that in myself over time to say, like, what will I regret not saying in this? And that's when you can really harness in and like build confidence in your own values, in your own beliefs, in that thing you have to say. Be like, no, this is important. And like I I can handle saying that sentence. Even if, like, who cares if I'm shaky with it, if my voice is clumsy because I'm learning how to use it in public? Who cares, you know? I gotta get that point out. Because otherwise I'm gonna go home upset. And I don't want to go home upset.
Yeah.
So
I think that another kind of like the final piece of this that that we haven't really touched on that's really interesting to me is the physiology of introverts versus extroverts.
Whoa.
And the sensitivity that comes into our nervous systems.
Yeah.
So there's some of this research that kind of looks into these personalities and how they're tied into the nervous system is there's actually this hypersensitivity to stimuli or increased sensitivity, at least with introverts. And that's part of why you need to go into like quiet sort of solitude to recharge your batteries. Whereas extroverts are lower on this sensitivity, so they tend to go for those like dopamine rushes, adrenaline rushes, because it's not as overwhelming. So they actually have one of the studies that correlated well between this nervous system reactivity and sort of quote unquote sensitivity with introversion is giving babies like different stimuli, whether it's toys, and also there's this like lemon juice test, and the babies that react the most strongly to the sourness of lemon juice, and like they actually correlated well to, as they followed them throughout their life cycle, into more introverts.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And
I love that.
Actually, I have a really fascinating story that I want to like punch this home with, because I was talking, Dan came for a visit here the other day, and so
we should get Dan on here.
If he'd be down for
we love Dan Groudon.
Yes.
Everyone go find him on Instagram.
Absolutely. I would love to have him on. I'll work towards it. He's kind of like our patron saint of introverts in the city, so it's kind of hard. And this is our fearless leader,
fearful leader. I don't know.
I don't think he's fearful. He's not. But you know, quiet. Our quiet leader.
Yeah.
So when Dan was a child playing hockey, and he's he grew into a really good hockey player. He doesn't talk about it because he's
the most humble man in the world. Yeah. It's annoying.
But so I told him about this because I'd been reading the book Quiet and reading about this study and this lemon juice test. And when Dan was playing hockey as a kid, there would be certain days that he'd be like, he'd go crazy on the ice, and he'd be like body checking kids and like holding them down to the ground. And every time it happened was after he had orange juice. And you know, orange juice has that citric acid in it, sort of the sourness, and it actually became like a household rule that Dan couldn't have orange juice before hockey. Because
it just hypes him up.
It did something to him that just like overwhelmed his nervous system and made him go crazy on the ice. And so I don't know. It's really interesting.
That is interesting. People go to drugs. You could just have some lemons, man. It's interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I find even in myself when I'm overstimulated via noise, people, light pollution, like whatever, I do get more aggressive.
Sure.
I'm not going to hurt anyone.
No.
But I do, like I say aggressive. I feel inside me. It's not expressed and hardly ever seen. Yeah. Really agitated.
Yeah.
And I can see it expressing itself. If I had an outlet, like hockey, or I've used boxing for this, it comes out pretty strong. When life gives you lemons.
Yeah.
Go pin a kid down on the ice, Dan.
So it was really interesting to hear that. It sounds like it ties in very well with this idea of sort of like an oversensitive nervous system. Mm-hmm. So there's a strong correlation with that, and it explains a lot, I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think this is maybe where mindfulness can come in really, really well, because, I mean, I can speak for this, and you can confirm or deny your story, but as an introvert, yeah, my nervous system can spike. And then it represents as anxiety. And that's how us introverts have this stereotype of being anxious, shy, little frail things. And it's just, I get so stimulated and I get so, like, I'll start to shake when things get a little too much for me. And that's just my sympathetic nervous system jumping straight into fight or flight.
Yeah.
And so for me, movement and mindfulness are two things, and I like to pair them personally, but those are two things that really help me regulate my nervous system. And this is interesting, actually. I listened to podcast Susan something. I can't remember. She was on the Impact Theory with Tim Bilyeu not long ago. She's an Australian woman. She wrote about sugar and mental health. And, yeah, I can't remember her last name right now. It starts with an N, I think. Anyway, she was talking about how the same part in your brain that's in charge of fight or flight is also in charge of, like, body mechanics.
Oh.
So going for a walk when you feel anxious will actually help shut off fight or flight. So that's a really helpful way to regulate your nervous system, which is why movement is so powerful for people. And she was saying, I don't know if I'm getting off topic or not, but she was saying how, you know, back in caveman days when we were in fight or flight, we were able to just, like, beat our chests and run and scream and, like, get that release.
Yeah.
And now in society, like, if you scream, people are going to call the cops because they think you're hurt or something along those lines, right? And so that's why movement can be such medicine to help bring the nervous system down.
Interesting.
It is interesting.
And the same thing with meditation, and that's why, like, I think I attribute that to a lot of getting through, those tougher, like, jobs that I've had that required a lot of, like, putting the energy out there. Was a lot of meditation and mindfulness to recharge and
fill yourself up
and keep calm, keep my sort of, like, hypersensitivity down and calm, and that helped a lot. And then I guess, like, the thing kind of to go back to that I really wanted to touch on was this idea that flow is a little bit easier for people that are introverted. And I think the reason for that is, like, this need for stimulation, whether it's you know, because we're introverted, want those quiet spaces a little bit more, makes it easier to work and everything. That's where flow and deep work comes in. And those are requirements, essentially, of getting into those states. And so that's where, if you're somebody that's extroverted, looking to reach, you know, whatever, find your flow, it often requires a little more diligent practice with knowing yourself so that you can either you know, stay focused, stay attentive to the task at hand. And then on the flip side, for introverts, it's the idea that you do have to get out there to find that passion first. Yeah,
it's kind of a backwards approach to the same thing.
Yeah.
And then I was just, when we were talking about this earlier, I was thinking about just how extroverts, because they want that. I mean, I can't speak for the group of extroverts, but I assume that they want that external input from people. And when you're in flow, it's just you. And so you have to learn how to shut that off in your brain. Whereas for us introverts, we already have that shut off. We don't need the input from other people, but we do need to get out there to figure out where we belong, like, right? However we get there. But because we're not looking for external validation or external input necessarily, we're at less distractions. There's less distractions in our minds to get there. Yeah.
It seems to hold true. That was something that Susan Cain was talking about on a podcast I recently listened to. And it makes sense to me. Yeah,
well, look at any artist do their work, right? Like I'm thinking right now of Jason Wilkins just because I've been watching his Instagram and it's really fun.
Yeah.
But he's like headphones on, like in his zone. No one else is there. He's not interacting with anyone. And then this beautiful, like, craziness comes out of him.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to watch because he does this, like, what do you call that? Time lapse.
Yeah. Of it?
Yeah. But yeah, any artist, they get in their zone. Dancers, like, they get in their zone so that they can actually flow. And they're just by themselves.
Yeah.
So it's neat to see.
Totally. And, like, even if it is something that requires you to be part of a group dynamic ultimately, or like a sports game or whatever. The mastery of it, the skill, the deep work, and the flow that goes into becoming that master is all done with solitude, or practice on your own.
Well, this makes me think of how you were saying how you prepare for your strongman competitions. You visualize it. Mm-hmm. You go into that. You run through it from start to finish, and then that's how you perform better ultimately. And that kind of, that I could jump off a few points here. Like, one, I want to say, if you're a shy introvert and you're scared of performing something, like, just do that. Go into meditation and like do the damn thing. Visualize it in your head in as much detail as possible. Yeah. So that you've already lived it. Yeah. And then it's not as scary when the time comes to actually perform it. Yep. Exactly. And then that can help you in group situations, like in sports. But I'm even thinking, like, because I've played in group sports in high school and stuff, and ultimately you're still just with yourself. Like, as much as there's social cues and visual cues, like, if you're sprinting after a ball, you can't worry about what Joe behind you is thinking or doing, because you're in that zone. Yep. But there's that beautiful thing called group flow, where you kind of all bounce off each other and somehow it works. Mm-hmm. Right? That's all I got. Oh, that's great. Excuse me. Actually, I think to wrap it up, there was one more question that came to mind for me that I'm just curious what you think about it, if it's true or if I'm just like imagining it. But do you think, like, as far as, so introverts kind of seek these different ways to express themselves, and do you think like tattoos play a role in that at all? Oh. Just because I know you're into like tattoos, and I think we know quite a few people that would tend to be more introverted, and I'm not well versed in the world to say, but what do you think about that? I think commonly people do use tattoos to express themselves. Mm-hmm. So it is inward feeling, sensation, whatever, put on an outward surface. Mm-hmm. So maybe. I was talking to Olivia Chessman, who's a tattoo artist here in town. I was talking to her about why I get tattoos, and it's maybe a bit of a different reason than introversion. But for me, it's usually like I'm going through a hard time and I can't get out of my head and into my body. Oh, okay. And having that stimulus on my body, it's a weird, like, she made a joke just being like, it's like healthy self-harm. It's a weird way to connect to your skin a little bit better. As much as there's pain involved, there's also art. I don't know. I do, like, Olivia is a huge introvert, and she's a tattoo artist. And I think we're going to have her on the show. Maybe we'll ask her and see. Yeah, it might be a good question for her. It is, I'm trying to think, it is something like, it does help you feel grounded in yourself. Like, I've got a lot of pieces on my body in random spots that I'll look at and be like, right, that's who I am. That's why I've got this. Like, they represent something for me, and it's a visual cue to bring me back down. Oh, okay. I can't speak for everyone. Like, some people are like, I got a cupcake because I like cupcakes. Yeah, she might be a better person to ask, actually. Yeah, I think she would know. Would work with a lot more people, and in an intimate situation where you can kind of identify people who are introverted or extroverted a bit better. So, I was just curious about that. It came to mind. I was like, that's an interesting question. Yeah. I don't know. All right. For me, yeah, but I don't know. Okay. Is there anything else? I think that... No, I think we covered it. I mean, if anyone has questions, they can throw them at us on the Instagram or in person, come on in or something, but... Yeah. I think... Cool. And I want to, I guess, like... Does this resonate? This is my question to the public, and I would love feedback for my own validation. But, like, did we speak correctly about extroverts? Because I'm not one. I don't know. Did we speak correctly about the collective of introverts? Or is it just that we're similar in the way that we regulate? Yeah. So if anyone has feedback or challenges for us, I would really love to know. Yeah, that's a good point. Because it's so personal. I feel like every introvert's different. Yeah. Every extrovert's probably different too. That's right? Why it's all on like a spectrum too.
It's interesting. Yeah. Let's get some comments and feedback here
I would like that.
Whether we share it or we don't have to share it necessarily, but we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. So
cool.
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up for today, and next week we've got Jess Dalladay on, so that'll be fun. We got to figure out what we're gonna focus on with her, because
she's got a lot going on.
Totally.
A lot, actually. Yeah, the healthy sweet potato on Instagram. If you guys want to do some studying before before we interview her, she's cool.
Yeah, and that way, if you got any questions for Jess, you can send them in before then, and we'll ask them on the show.
Cool.
So yeah.
All right, let's go recharge.
Yep. Hey everyone. Thank you so much for listening or watching this episode of the FlowCast. If you like listening to this podcast, be sure to leave us a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. It helps to spread out the awareness and let other people know about the podcast. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and subscribe. And if you want to be notified when these episodes come out each week, you can also hit the bell beside the subscribe button, and you'll be notified right away whenever a new episode of the FlowCast is launched. We love to hear from you about whatever topics you want us to cover on the FlowCast. So send us your questions. You can either find us through YouTube or Instagram, whatever's easiest for you. And that way you can send your questions in, and we'll be happy to answer them on the show. And of course, as always, thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you again next time.